Ending Life Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome to episode 44 of the Clackmannanshire Women for Independence podcast. The music this week is epic pirate music, copyright-free music from Pirate Crew on YouTube. Well, this has been quite a momentous week in Scottish politics. First of all, we had the shock resignation, using resignation in inverted commas there, of Jackson Carlaw, the leader of the Scottish Tories, who's only been in post for 5 months. And at the same time, we have Adam Tompkins, who might otherwise have been seen as a contender. He said he's stepping down. He's also been quoted as saying now, well, it appears that the majority of the Scottish people want independence. Now, the Clacks WFI's bat phone has been in overdrive as we speculated on who might be in what we assumed would be a leadership contest, and I think we came to the conclusion that our favourite pairing would be Murdo against Annie, and not really minding who won. It was all good for the independence movement. But who have London decided in their wisdom would make a better leader of the Scottish Tories? Well, funnily enough, they've decided that part-time linesman, rat-faced wee naff from Murray, wee Dougie Ross, whose only professed ambition or vision, should he ever become Prime Minister, would be to crack down on gypsies, would be the ideal candidate. I always find it astonishing just how off the mark Westminster are. I mean, last week we had Bozo up in Orkney to save the Union, and guess what? He didn't. And now they think that Dougie Ross is going to be the one who turns it all around. Well, I just can't see it. I've never heard anybody with a good word to say for him, other than perhaps that one moment when he did show some mettle and he resigned from Bozo's cabinet over whatever it was now, I forget. But, do you know, that in itself doesn't negate every other negative, hateful, nasty, sneering thing that he's ever said. It reminds me of the time many years ago when my son was doing some primary school homework on World War II. And in amongst the graphic for a 9 or 10-year-old description of the slaughter and destruction of the Second World War, he'd also written that Hitler was famous for his garden parties. And to this day I remember that as going, yeah, but he might have thrown a good garden party. There were a few other things we would have to take into account when weighing up his value as a human being. I'm not going to compare Dougie Ross to Hitler, but you got to take the whole picture here. And just as a souvenir, here's Jackson Carlaw at his last FMQs.
Jackson Carlaw. The First Minister concluded her statement by reminding everybody of the importance of facts. When Parliament last met on the 9th of July, and in response to questions from me, the First Minister repeatedly said that the prevalence rate of the coronavirus was 5 times lower in Scotland than elsewhere in the UK. Subsequently, this figure was widely reported and repeated in the media. This morning, the Director General for Regulation at the UK Statistics Authority wrote to us, and I know to the Scottish Government as well, giving his verdict on whether that statistic was true. And his verdict is damning. Firstly, when challenged at the time, the Scottish Government said it compared their Scottish Government COVID-19 modelling to a survey statistic for England. But when the UK Statistics Authority investigated and asked for the source of this statistic, the Scottish Government changed its story and said it was something else entirely. It was now a figure from a London university for the whole UK. Why did the Scottish Government mislead the public about the source of this claim?
First Minister.
I don't think that is the case, and let me say I stand by the view, which I think is backed up by the evidence, that prevalence of the virus is significantly lower in Scotland right now than in England. although this is not something I have a shred of complacency about. The issue with the statistic I cited before was that the UK English part of that statistic has not been published, and that is not down to me. The UK government hasn't published it, and I would encourage them, and perhaps Jackson Carlow will join me in encouraging them to do so. But if we look, and again, let me say here, my focus is on making sure that we keep this virus under control in Scotland, and I don't want to sound in any way as if I am complacent about that. But if we look at the number of people who have died over this month until now, for example, and every single death is a tragedy, in England, reported deaths under the daily measurement are around 2,000. In Scotland, they are 9. So again, I think that backs up the fact that there is a significantly lower prevalence and incidence of the virus in Scotland right now, and that is because of the elimination strategy that we're pursuing and the very cautious approach to coming out of lockdown. I am trying, as we speak, I'm trying to persuade the UK government and to join us in that express objective of eliminating the virus, and I hope we will get common ground on that. So we are making really good progress in Scotland. That's not down to me or the government, that's down to the sacrifices of everybody across the country. Our objective and our challenge now, as things become more volatile across the world, is to do all the things required to protect that progress, and that's what I am very focused on.
Jackson Carlow. Well, I'm afraid that's not what the UK Statistics Authority had to say. Here's what they said. The sources provided with do not allow for a meaningful comparison to be made. But that is exactly what the First Minister did. So it's unacceptable that the First Minister is now trying to downplay this, because the importance is clear. This isn't just a number. This isn't some statistical pedantry. This was the centrepiece of policy used to justify major decisions just 3 weeks ago. Ministers used it to explain the timing of lockdown being eased. When the Scottish tourism industry was crying out for a positive message, the First Minister refused to shut down the idea of closing the border, using that prevalence statistic as the basis. Nicola Sturgeon used this prevalence figure to suggest her policy was working better compared to elsewhere in the UK. Here is what the UK Statistics Authority say. We do not think that the sources above allow for a quantified and uncaveated comparison of the kind that was made. Will the First Minister give us a straight admission? She made a comparison which she may have chosen to believe that was not true.
First Minister. I accept the figures weren't published, and I accept the views of the statistics regulator on that. But I'd make, I suppose, a few points, and I don't know, I do deeply regret the sort of, instead of focusing on the substance of the issues we're all dealing with here, this attempt to somehow pretend that Scotland hasn't made the progress that we self-evidently have made in the fight of this virus is bizarre. We should all be so deeply grateful and relieved, I know I am, that we're seeing this virus driven to the low levels that we are seeing now in Scotland, although none of us should be complacent about that. And, you know, I quoted figures, and the figures I'm about to quote, just for Jackson Carlow's assurance, you can go onto the UK government's coronavirus dashboard and find these statistics. They are updated every day. In this month so far, around, I don't have the precise figure in front of me right now, but around 2,000 deaths in England have been reported under the daily measurement. These are people with confirmed cases of coronavirus. The corresponding figure in Scotland is 9. We have about 8.2% of the population. So I don't know whether Jackson Carlow is really saying that he doesn't himself think that there is a significantly lower prevalence of the virus in Scotland right now than elsewhere. You can see it in the daily case numbers that are reported as well. So I may have used a statistic that wasn't published, and the statistics regulator rightly and properly has made his views known on that, and I respect that. But for goodness sake, there is plenty other published measures that lead to the same conclusion. And why would anybody want to deny that instead of saying we're really glad that Scotland is now in this stronger position? And I make no apology, Presiding Officer, for having taken the decisions that have led us to this position with all the sacrifices that people have made, and I will still take the decisions designed to get this country as safely as I possibly can through this crisis, whatever politics Jackson Carlow might want to play.
Jackson Carlow. I think the First Minister has to be very careful when she talks about playing politics. When she is the leader and the chief executive of her party, profiteer from COVID virus, by producing party political face masks to raise funds for the SNP, and then the SNP elected parliamentarians. And the issue here is that public confidence in government decisions should not be undermined by made-up figures to substantiate political party spin. Now, I'm perplexed because the binder in front of the First Minister is full of detail. The First Minister is well prepared. She is the first to bring a statistic to any debate. She made this claim about the prevalence rate 7 times, and again as recently as last week. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. It's not simply not for the First Minister to say she thinks this is all fine, nor to say that this is all very complicated and she has to try and imagine what the numbers were, nor to suggest that the UK Statistics Authority has been anything other than damning. The First Minister knows this prevalence statistic was wrong, and she knows why it was wrong. Now, people across the country take the First Minister at her word, and now we know that they were repeatedly misled on this fact. Will she apologise?
First Minister.
I genuinely find myself right now feeling quite sorry for Jackson Carlow. I've been a politician for 30 years, and I still can't imagine getting so bound up in bitter partisan politics that I can't bring myself to welcome the fact that we have made such progress against a deadly virus. How blinded must you be to find yourself in that position? And my tolerance for this kind of politics is lower than it has ever been before. Let me just, the conclusion I drew about the relative prevalence was not wrong. The figures I accept, were not published, and that is not down to me, it's down to decisions of the UK government. But again, I come back to, we're in a position right now that over the course of July, we have had 9 registered deaths under the daily measurement in Scotland, none for the last 2 weeks at all, and the corresponding figure in England is around 2,000. So even if you think the figure I used previously was wrong, you're entitled to think that. The figures now demonstrate the relative position, and why would anybody try to gainsay that? Why would anybody find pleasure in arguing that that is not the case? I've had to stand up day in and day out and report these death figures. The relief I feel every day when I'm able to report no deaths because of the reducing prevalence, because of the reducing incidence, because people across this country are doing the right things is immense. And I'm going to continue to focus on that. Yes, I will continue to do everything to persuade people to wear face coverings, and in terms of my party, every penny of profit made will go to charity, actually. But I will do everything possible to encourage people to abide by all of the advice, because that's what's got us into this position. Jackson Carlow, for his own narrow reasons, might not want to recognise the strong position Scotland has got itself into, but I'm afraid it is a reality. And the focus now and the challenge for all of us is to make sure we continue that reality and don't go backwards. And that's what I'm going to continue to spend every waking moment of my life concentrating on.
This week, I am unashamedly going to play 10 minutes of somebody else's podcast, and that somebody else is Richard J. Murphy. Richard Murphy, for anybody who doesn't know him, is described as a British chartered accountant and political economist who campaigns on issues of tax avoidance and tax evasion. He advises the TUC on economics and taxation and is a long-standing member of the Tax Justice Network. He is a professor of practice in international political economy at the City University London. Richard also has an excellent blog called Tax Research UK. If you're thinking, oh, this all sounds riveting, he's very interested in Scottish independence and the economics of independence. And he's put out just a 10-minute blog today tackling the subject of how much debt would Scotland need to take on in the event of independence. How much of the UK's debt would Scotland need to shoulder? I think this is a fascinating summary and well worth listening to. We've been sharing it widely on Indie Live Radio this week. We've been sharing it all over Facebook. Might as well stick it in here as well, because I think everybody should hear this explanation.
Hello, I'm Richard Murphy. I want to talk about the question of how much debt Scotland might owe the rest of the UK if it became independent. I wrote a blog about that this week, and that blog has now transferred to the national newspaper in Scotland, so I thought it worth discussing it in a video as well. This is complicated and I'm going to miss out some of the detail that's in the blog, so I'm going to look at the principles. The first principle that we have to look at is how much debt is there? UK national debt, according to the government, is over £2 trillion at present. That's £2,000 billion. But that's not true. Their own audited accounts show that the UK debt, net of national savings and investment, was £1,240 billion at 31st March 2019. And for various reasons, it's impossible that it's gone up by more than about £60 billion net of quantitative easing since then. And that figure has to be stated net of quantitative easing because QE cancels government debt. So total UK government debt at present is about £1,300 billion. That's the most that we're talking about. Second, how much of that could be owed by Scotland? Unionists frequently suggest that we simply apply a proportion to this total UK debt based upon how many people live in Scotland, which is about 5.6 million people, and how many people live in the UK as a whole, which is about 66 million people. And that's roughly 8%. And if you do that figure using the precise numbers, then you'll come up with a total debt owed by Scotland to the rest of the UK if Scotland became independent of £106 billion. Now, that's the maximum figure I think we could talk about, but I don't believe that's the right number either, because there are some more adjustments to make. First of all, Scotland didn't run a deficit from at least 1980 until 2014 because of oil. In 1980, the total UK national debt was £98 billion. In 2014, total UK debt was something like £1,440 billion before quantitative easing at the time. So something like £1,340 billion of national debt was incurred without any contribution being made to that debt by Scotland at all. My suggestion is very simple, that debt should be taken out of account altogether when considering how much Scotland owes. Now, of course, more gross debt before quantitative easing has been incurred since 2014. This is indisputable. But when you add all these sums up, the maximum amount that Scotland might pay once there's an apportionment turns out to be remarkable. In fact, the total debt that Scotland could pay would be something like £440 billion for apportionment purposes, and there's over £500 billion of QE. Put all that together and suddenly Scotland doesn't owe England money. England would owe Scotland money if Scotland was to become independent. And I could make another adjustment yet again to that number, which would be to allow for the fact that there's interest included in the debt charge from 2014 to 2020, which Scotland shouldn't pay because it's being paid on interest accumulated not by Scotland but by the rest of the UK. Now, my argument then is actually something like 20 to 25 billion is in fact actually owed by the rest of the UK to Scotland at present. Once we adjust for the real debt number, apportion it correctly, taking oil into account and allowing for appropriate and not inappropriate interest charges. There's another dimension to this. Even if none of those adjustments were agreed, let's suppose that the oil adjustment wasn't agreed, the interest adjustment wasn't agreed. We could even argue about QE, although I have absolutely no idea why. There's still another factor to take into account here, and that is that the split between Scotland and the rest of the UK, if Scotland became independent, would be governed by international law. And international law says that in these situations, one part of the old combined country is considered to be the continuing state, and one is considered to be the new state. Now, there's no doubt that England, Wales and Northern Ireland would be the continuing state in this situation. England will want this because that guarantees their seat in the United Nations Security Council, it guarantees the continuity of all their international agreements and so on. That will happen. And as the UK agreed in 2014 before the Scottish referendum, in that situation Scotland would literally owe none of the UK's debt at the time of separation. Legally, that debt would have to be owed by the rest of the UK, England, Wales and Northern Ireland. But what that means is that if there's to be a discussion about Scotland making a contribution for debt, it's not a legal obligation because there would be nothing legally owing. It would be what is called a compensation payment for the costs that England and Wales and Northern Ireland would incur as a result of Scotland leaving. Is England repaying national debt? The simple answer is no, it isn't. Since 1945, the UK as a whole has borrowed 1,740 billion or so pounds in total. It's gone up a bit, perhaps since I did that calculation, but it'll do for now. Out of that total, less than 40 billion pounds has been repaid. And in effect, nothing has been repaid for the last 19 or so years. In other words, England is simply not repaying its national debt now. We don't pay back the national debt at all, so why would Scotland be required to make compensation to England, Wales and Northern Ireland for repaying debt that they're not repaying? This is a simple concept on compensation payments. It's like making an insurance claim. You're not allowed to profit from an insurance claim. You're not allowed to profit from an accident claim if you were injured. You're only allowed to be put back in the position you were in. That's the legal concept. And if England, Wales and Northern Ireland aren't repaying their national debt, Scotland can't be asked to repay that national debt for them or to reimburse them for a cost they haven't got. In other words, so long as there is no English national debt repaid after Scotland becomes independent, Scotland won't have to pay a penny back for what is owing on the national debt, whatever the number I've already been discussing is. That leaves just one question left, and that is, would Scotland owe interest on this outstanding balance, which was probably never to be paid? Well, I think there is a reasonable claim to say that Scotland should pay on that. Now, of course, if England owes Scotland, that's another matter altogether. Would England be willing to pay Scotland? I'm not sure. But if we take the worst case example of Scotland owing 106 billion to England, and I stress that's the worst case example, and really I can't imagine that number arising, the maximum interest rate that England is now paying on its long-term national debt is 0.6%. In other words, the maximum that Scotland could compensate England, Wales and Northern Ireland with regard to interest owing would be 0.6% of that 106 billion, which is near enough 600 million a year. Now, 600 million pounds a year is a lot, but put this in the context of the Scottish national budget after independence, which is going to be something over 60 billion pounds a year, probably over 70 billion pounds a year. Put it in that context, and the payment is less than 1% of total government expenditure in Scotland after independence. Compared to what the UK as a whole has been paying in recent years, where that figure has run up to 6, 7 and even 8%, this is a tiny obligation to pay. In other words, if Scotland became independent, two things would happen. First, it wouldn't have to repay the UK national debt. Not any chance of that, because there's no legal basis for it being required to do so. And secondly, its interest obligations will tumble to one of the smallest in the world. Scotland won't be burdened by debt if it becomes independent. Scotland will be liberated from debt by becoming independent. And there's nothing that England, Wales and Northern Ireland can do about that, because this has already legally been agreed that they will assume the responsibility for the full debt, and compensation basis of payment, as basically laid out in common law, would require that no more than this 600 million a year, or maybe a lot less, be paid. What I'm saying is, The argument that Scotland can't afford to be independent because of the debts it will inherit is nonsense. Scotland can very definitely afford to be independent precisely because that will reduce the debt burden upon it. Its future is looking good. I'm Richard Murphy. If you're interested in what I've been talking about here, I will be making other videos around the Scottish economy. Follow me on Twitter at Richard J. Murphy. Look at my blog, Tax Research UK. Yes, I know, Tax Research UK, but maybe that won't last forever. And I'll be talking to you again soon, I hope.
Well, this is very exciting. I'm sitting in the park in Tillicootree. Clacks WFI's coffee meetup. We're having it outside today full day. It's incredibly hot. I don't know if we're going to catch much audio, but we'll try.
Pubs are open, but gyms can't be open. Because in pubs they're going to social distance
Wow.
after they've had a few drinks. Do you know?
I must say that one's hard to get the logic of. The
They're
pubs.
saying fun fairs are opening.
Yeah, but swimming pools where you're going to be head to foot doused in chlorine.
It's not so much the swimming pools, it's the changing rooms they're saying. And it's the, do you have to have a like staggered time so there's only a few people in the changing rooms and you must stay in the pool for your full 45-minute session because your time for staying after, and then there's all the, and what if you've got like a disabled child with you and it takes you 20 minutes to get changed rather than you've only been given like kind of a 5-minute allotted time.
True
so there was all these different things. Good morning.
Hello,
That's all right, I'll send this one.
how you doing?
Fine too, okay,
Yeah.
Went out for breakfast this morning.
Oh, nice. Where did you go?
Ladybird, the Ladybird.
All right.
Because I can sit outside.
Yes.
I go tomorrow, I can sit inside.
You want to sit inside?
No, really.
No. See, neither do I. That's when, like, okay, my mum yesterday, I spoke to my mum and her and her friend had gone in shopping in Stirling and they'd been in Primark, and I want to go, stop going shopping!
Still
You're
getting most of my-
79!
So I'm getting most of my shop delivered. Still. And I'm still going to be doing that.
Joy gave me a join up to this Hello Fresh. So the food's great and it's like different recipes, and even, but they've sent me out you can invite other people to do it. So you get your first week free. I cancel immediately if you want to. So I thought, if you want me to send you, do you want a week's worth free? Because you can sign up for it, get it for a week, and then just cancel
Well,
it.
just be a little bit cautious with them, because my cousin gets it and likes it, uses
Yeah.
it, because she's not a cook. She's confident enough when she's got all the ingredients and the recipe to do it. So she sent it to me for a free week. Now I cook, James cooks.
Yeah.
I looked at the things and I thought, nothing there that's going to make any difference to my life. So I didn't bother. Now I've been getting reminders from HelloFresh saying, you still haven't signed up yet. And they're sending her reminders saying, your friend Fiona still hasn't signed up yet.
So yes, but I think, when you mentioned to me about all the packaging,
Yes, that was what. Well, I got back to them on that
Yeah.
because that's what I said. Actually, it's good. The portion sizes are good, but it's the volume of packaging that comes with it. And I think, could they not do it differently? Could they not, like, I've had it now 3 weeks, and every week, whatever recipes, and it's like 3 meals for 3 people each week, so that you've got like 9 meals there. But every week a recipe has required a couple of cloves of garlic. So every week they've sent me a bulb of garlic. Now that first bulb of garlic
Would have done everything.
would have done me for a month,
Aye.
and then, but they do like chicken stock powder, but it comes in wee sachet. And I'm like, why could they not say, right, if you do it, this is what we want you to have at first. So your first order is going to come with a big batch of chicken stock, and but is it all? Because you can do 2 teaspoonfuls easy enough. It doesn't take a non-cook doesn't panic about that. It's just count 2 teaspoons. But maybe people like that, tear the packet and just chuck it in. It was chili flakes, so it was a wee round plastic tub with chili flakes in it. And again, I've had that twice out of the 3 weeks I've had it, and I've still not finished the chili flakes from the first week.
Who doesn't have chili flakes
I know,
in their
exactly.
house though?
Well, and the other thing,
But we get meat from athletes, like grass-fed meat, and it's Scottish. It comes in this beautifully robust box, and it's got ice packs in with it,
Yeah,
so it keeps it
yeah.
fresh. But they also wrap it in this sort of silvered cardboard, which is great insulation, I'm sure, but I don't think it's recyclable.
Again, it's like these wee ice bags that they put in,
Yeah.
which they say can be reused, but it's like, well, why don't they take them away? Why don't I leave them outside and they can take them away and use them another time?
That would be circular economy.
Yeah, and then
So how has it been feeling with all the stages coming out of shielding? Because obviously our experience has been really different.
Yeah, I think it's actually been it's been fine, because I get a text in the morning to tell me to listen to the brief. Then I get another text at night telling me what was in the briefing. Then I get a letter the following day telling me what was in the briefing. So
That's really good though, isn't it?
it's been second to none.
Yeah.
It's absolutely class.
That's excellent.
So they tell you the incident rates, and there's going to be a new app for the shielders who you can go in and actually register, and it'll tell you the incidence rate and the risk. And I've got a list of what's risky, what is going to a museum's higher risk than going to a shop.
Right, why is that? I wonder.
because what data have they got on going to museums? Because nobody's been going to museums.
I think the museums are still shut, are they not?
Aye.
Also, you don't really get to touch things in museums, do you?
So we've got Skybook and we're just staying in a B&B because I know I've been there before, and I know Frances will have it like anytime she has somebody staying, she's leaving 3 days in between. She's leaving 3 days before she goes in and changes everything and cleans it, so that she's not putting herself at any risk. She's not going to have to do like the cooking outside. Elgol doesn't have a restaurant or anything. We've got no cooking facilities other than like camping stove or whatever, so we'll have to be kind of organised that way, and we'll do our cooking outside. So we might be outside cooking in the rain because of the rain.
Something that would be doable and pleasurable one year with just a couple of little barriers, and it's enough to go, oh no, like my mother, she would have come up by the train,
Yeah.
but she's not up
No.
for going on the train, so I've got to drive down, pick her up and come back up, which is, so it's only 4 hours. But and then I've got her a lift with her sister who's up staying with her daughter in Edinburgh on the way back, so we've managed to do it.
Yeah.
But even then I'm thinking, right, well that's her. Is she in my bubble? And I've not seen her for since before the pandemic, so I'm bringing her up here, and then if we go through to Edinburgh, there's my cousin's family and her mother. So is that 4 different bubbles? Is that okay that I've kind of lost track now.
In the laugh at car crash, going, and then Michelle Valentine, I mean, she didn't hold back, did she?
On the leadership contest, did they not have a wee falling out? Yeah, and this is her revenge as a dish best served gold.
No, but she said, well, it was when she said, I'm pleased because he wasn't the best player, I shouldn't have got it in the first place, type of thing, was basically what she said. Yeah. But now, and then you've heard there's been various things saying that Ruth Davidson's apparently been doing the phoning round saying leave the path clear for Douglas Ross. He's not even an MSP, so you're assuming that.
I hope he gets it. That'd be such a gift.
That's another one you think, yeah, like Carlo was a gift for us.
Murdo would be a gift, Annie would be a gift, Michelle would be a gift. The only one who I think might give us trouble is if Ruth Davidson gets parachuted back in. She said she's stepping down in Holyrood, but I don't think she'll want to be associated with a disastrous campaign.
They'll maybe annex themselves from Westminster Tories and set up an actual Scottish Tory party that's not registered in.
Well, that would be a good thing, wouldn't it? That sort of opens the door more to independence.
Saying, yeah, and I think soon the Scottish Tories are going to come out for Scottish independence as well.
I think they're annoyed that things have been directed to Westminster.
Yeah, and they clearly are. But that's a good thing, because that's another bit of the jigsaw in place that we don't have to sort out afterwards.
Neil says, he says because the way things are going, it's looking, everything's pointing towards independence. And he says they'll shut down Holyrood, they'll annex us, they've already got the 3,000 in Edinburgh House or whatever they're calling it.
Well, do you know though, that's the time when you just have to pick up your flag and get down there.
I know. Yesterday I watched the briefing yesterday, and it got to once Nicola's done her bit and the floor's open for questions, and of course it goes straight to Aunt Jackson Carlo, and I just went click.
Well,
I'm not watching this.
that he was saying really stupid stuff.
Did you not get the feeling though that his heart's not in it? I think he's fundamentally a more decent person than he's been having to behave, and you can almost imagine Westminster. You need to get in there, get the knife in. So he just starts on a line of attack that fizzles because his heart's not in it. And it's a stupid argument. I know that thing about masks. I mean, that was either he thought it up then and there and just said it without thinking, or he'd not done his research. No.
Get Tory masks in. Whatever.
Yeah, they're going.
As a mask.
But then all the kind of things that you rely on, like doing things locally or using bus services, you've got people that are kind of like, I don't know if I want to get on a bus. So like when Jamie wasn't feeling well, and I went up to Blairathel to pick her up, because I'm like, I'd rather I came and got you and you're in the car with us than going on a train. And
But did you hear Mike Russell giving his statement about the power grab? So infuriating what they're doing, and they're all standing up there. They're all going to fight it tooth and nail. And you think, well, great, but what are you going to do? They've got an 80-seat majority, and that's just more and more. I think there's no point at all of us having anything to do with it.
It's ridiculous that they've got an 80-seat majority on 43% of the vote.
Yeah, in England.
Yes.
Not here. Just remains to be seen. So what are the other options?
I know, you get people saying again, why do we send our Scottish MPs down there just so that they can get brayed at from the...
I don't know about this alliance umbrella idea. I'm still wrestling with that one. Whoever you speak to, I kind of go, oh, that's a good idea. Then somebody says the opposite, you go, oh, that's a good point. And then somebody says something, oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that. And I just have no idea which way I'm going to go eventually. And when you think of the most voters are not sitting on a park bench discussing politics, are they? They're not. So, are they even conscious that these other parties exist?
That sometimes what worries you is like how many like voters out there are actually having these discussions, and many people I think are just confused by it all.
Yeah.
They don't make it straightforward purposely, so people don't take an interest in it, or people are too busy trying to deal with their shitty lives.
Yeah, and there's a pandemic on, and there's.
Oh yeah.
I just feel the tide is moving in our favour.
You're getting so many people saying.
I mean, statistically, more than half the people you meet should be in favour of independence, because it's at 54% and rising.
I know.
It should be, and we kind of assume it's just us. So that was Coffee in the Park, complete with birds, children playing, people dropping bottles in the bottle bank, cars going past, wind. But I hope you got the gist of it. One of the things we mentioned during that discussion was Mike Russell's speech to Holyrood about the power grab. And it was a very good speech, as all of Mike Russell's are, and quite horrifying in its revelations. So we're going to play that now, and to leave on a light note, we're going to include Murdo's question.
I call on Michael Russell, Cabinet Secretary, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, on the 16th of July, the UK Government published a white paper on the UK internal market. The Scottish Government believes that the unilateral proposals made in that white paper without proper consultation with the devolved administrations are unacceptable and unnecessary. I'm therefore grateful, Presiding Officer, for the opportunity to make a statement on the matter. Once we have seen the final legislation, the Government will provide a full and comprehensive rebuttal of what is intended. But there is enough in this document and enough information now coming from stakeholders about their concerns to make us believe that we must immediately start the process of defending Scotland against such a blatant power grab. The UK Government is allowing only 4 weeks for consultation on its proposals in the paper. This is clearly inadequate and is likely to prevent proper scrutiny. So can I say at the outset that whilst we will be submitting a clear note of our opposition to the proposals within the timescale and circulating that widely, we will also publish more comprehensive information as the issue unfolds, and particularly once the legislative consent process is underway. Presiding Officer, the purported purpose of these proposals is to secure, and I quote, a UK-wide approach to ensure that the seamless trade across the UK's internal market is maintained by providing a market access commitment. But there is, in fact, no threat to that seamless trade. So this is a naked political ploy, a predetermined draconian solution in search of a non-existent problem. Two principles, mutual recognition and non-discrimination, well known in EU law, are to be enshrined in the new legislation. But far from, and I quote again, minimising domestic trade costs, business uncertainty and bureaucracy, and protecting our national life, enforcing these principles in the way proposed will increase bureaucracy and make life more difficult for every business and consumer in Scotland. The real threat to the prosperity of these islands comes not from the devolved administrations, but from the current UK government. It is the UK government which is causing chaos, confusion and massive cost by its ideological pursuit of a hard deal, low deal or no deal Brexit in the midst of the worst recession in centuries and an unprecedented pandemic. As of today, some 5 months before the end of a transition period that could and should have been extended, there is no certainty on tariffs, on customs, on cross-border flows of data and people, or on regulations. In fact, Presiding Officer, the only certainty is that these new proposals would undermine the high quality and standards that Scotland has set for food production and animal welfare for the sole purpose of allowing the UK to do bad trade deals. That point was made effectively by the distinguished European jurist Sir David Edward when he observed the principles of mutual recognition and non-discrimination are not simple matters. For example, the White Paper, he says, omits any reference to the principles of proportionality and subsidiarity, which are essential ways of balancing and reconciling conflict. And he also points to a huge volume of European case law and other writing on what he calls a highly complex and sophisticated subject. So these proposed changes undermine not just the basic foundations of devolution, but also all existing mechanisms for cooperation, the development of common frameworks, and the entire list of devolved competencies. In reality, Presiding Officer, the actual purpose of these proposals is all too clear. The UK government intends to ditch the high regulatory standards we have enjoyed as a member of the EU and wants to do so without seeking consent from the people of Scotland. Now, and we can be sure that this is the purpose of the proposals because there is already a workable and constitutionally appropriate way forward to deal with any actual issues that arose from any threats to internal trade, if those ever happened. That way forward is to do what we're already doing, to bring into effect the common frameworks currently being negotiated between the UK government and devolved administrations in line with the principles agreed in the JMC as far back as 2017. Indeed, the White Paper itself, in paragraphs 87 to 94, sets out the common frameworks programme and admits, and again I quote, that it is already creating an intergovernmental policy development and decision-making process which provides high levels of regulatory alignment in specific policy areas along with roles and responsibilities of each administration. That's paragraph 88. The paper also points out correctly that common frameworks can and do work within the devolution settlements and respect the democratic accountability of the devolved legislatures. The Scottish Government has engaged in good faith in the cross-UK project to develop these common frameworks in line with the agreed principles. We are not the ones who are now tearing up previous agreements in order to veto constructive discussion and impose an outcome designed and desired only by Westminster. What the UK Government wants is not smooth trade, but to take back control. And not just from the EU, but from the people of Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland. And it certainly does not want anything to stand in its way, as it willfully dismantles the high-quality system of regulation and protection we inherit from our years in the EU. The effect of the proposals would be to prevent this Parliament from requiring goods or services produced elsewhere in the UK to meet the standards decided on by this Parliament. In other words, if the UK government can simply change the rules for England, probably using the English votes for English laws procedure, which excludes Scottish MPs, Scotland would just have to accept that decision. Helpfully, the White Paper itself even contains examples of where it could do so. On page 77, in a section headed Cost of Regulatory Divergence, there is a case study on deposit return schemes. On page 78, there is an example concerning food labelling. On pages 79 to 82, there is a case study on food manufacturing, which covers food hygiene, recycling, animal welfare, and environmental matters such as pesticides. And page 82 also specifically mentions minimum pricing as a regulatory restriction. And on page 85, the paper discusses building regulations and granting construction permits. That's a considerable range, Presiding Officer, and they're only examples. Of course, the mutual recognition principle is intended to be just that, reciprocal. The market in England will have to accept standards set in Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland. But it is very clear that if that were ever to happen in a way that disadvantaged the current Tory UK government, before you could say the tail wagging the dog, we would find that only rules made in Westminster could change the market in England. Presiding Officer, my final points concern the implications of these proposals for devolution in governance. There is no commitment in the paper to seeking legislative consent from this Parliament. No recognition that these matters are devolved or affect the competence of this Parliament. The paper clearly says in paragraph 154, the evolution and overall shape of the UK's internal market will be overseen by the UK Parliament, and that key decisions will be put to the UK Parliament for approval. The implication is that anything in the underpinning legislation will be reserved from now on. This Parliament will lose any say, even on matters initially excluded, like minimum unit pricing. The legislation outlined in the paper will require legislative consent under the Sewell Convention, and the Scottish Government will be recommending, in the strongest possible terms, that this Parliament does not give any such consent, and that the UK Government therefore respects that decision in line with the rules of our constitutional system. The paper also makes clear the intentions of the UK Government to centralise control in other areas. Most notably and explicitly, the paper sets out its plans to reserve the subsidy control regime. It makes clear that devolved administrations will have no role in designing that regime, and that this Parliament will have no role in approving it. Paragraph 173 says the future subsidy control mechanisms should be the responsibility of the UK Parliament to determine. Again, reserving subsidy control will require the consent of this Parliament under the Sewell Convention, and again the Scottish Government will be strongly advising this Parliament to refuse that consent, and the UK Government must respect that decision. And at paragraphs 128 and 182, the paper talks of clarifying spending powers of all levels of government and for the UK Government to construct replacements of EU programmes. Again, it does not take much thought to realise that these paragraphs mean, amongst other things, the shared prosperity fund, replacing devolved responsibility for the current EU structural funds. The intention is that those funds will become a reserve matter and solely controlled by the UK Government. In all this, Presiding Officer, there is a consistent pattern emerging regarding the Tory view of UK governments. This insists on total freedom of action for the UK Government, unrestrained by any requirement to negotiate or compromise. It wants substantial constraint on powers presently held by the devolved administrations. That is the agenda, and it is being pursued with vigour. The Scottish Government is committed to cooperation, but it will not be bullied. There are alternatives to these ill-conceived proposals, including taking the Voluntary Common Frameworks programme to its anticipated conclusion. And finally, Presiding Officer, none of this was mentioned, even in passing, during the 2016 EU referendum, or indeed in the 2014 independence one. In 2014, we were exhorted to lead, not leave. We were told that a no vote would deliver a better and fairer Britain. And of course, we were assured that our place in Europe was secure. In 2016, we were promised that this Parliament would gain more powers, that we would be free to make our decisions. And even, and this is Michael Gove himself speaking in June 2016, that if the UK left the EU, then on migration, and I quote him, it would be for Scotland to decide, when the reality is that the UK Government are forcing through an end to freedom of movement against the explicit wishes of this Parliament and the people of Scotland. Presiding Officer, not a word that has been said to us in the last 6 years about these matters has turned out to be true. So it takes no great prescience to realise that all the promises being made now will be equally hollow. It is not too late for the UK to turn back from this route, but I can assure Scotland that if it does not, then this government will fight these proposals tooth and nail in every possible place and with no intention of giving way. I hope it will enjoy the support of the whole chamber in so doing.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. And I now call on Murdo Fraser. Mr Fraser, please.
So I have two questions for the Cabinet Secretary. Firstly, not one SNP politician has been able to give a simple example of a power currently exercised by this Parliament which will be taken away by these proposals. There was nothing in the statement about that today, Presiding Officer. Can he do any better? And secondly, can he confirm that in relation to all the powers we are talking about, the SNP want to see every last one returned to Brussels at the first opportunity?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, let me deal with the second question first. The SNP want Scotland to be in the mainstream of Europe, to be a member of the European Union. Moreover, that is what the people of Scotland want, because that's what they voted for and have repeatedly voted for. So if Murdo Fraser is not happy to be part of a community of 27 nations, with our joining would be 28, that is freely sharing decision-making, he is entitled to that position. But I tell you, not a single European nation within the single market would be treated or has been treated in the way that the UK intends to treat Scotland through this document. And that is clear from the analysis from David Edwards, which I quoted. The reality is there is no proportionality in this, there's no subsidiarity in this, there's no question of minimum standards, there's no question of national interest prevailing in terms of decisions. This is purely take it or leave it, because we know what we're going to do from the UK government. On the second question, let me make a point to this. This is a line, not an original line. It was Michael Gove's line last week, and it continues to be Michael Gove's line. And I'm sure Murdo Fraser enjoys quoting it. But actually, I could stand here all afternoon. In fact, I probably should just take Schedule 5 of the Scotland Act and start to read out what's reserved and then talk about everything else. Because every single power that the Scottish Parliament has can be undermined and taken away by these proposals. Every single one. I've mentioned food standards, but let me just go, Presiding Officer, to what I said in my statement. Clearly, Murdo Fraser wasn't listening. There is deposit return schemes, food labelling, food manufacturing, food hygiene, recycling, animal welfare, environmental matters such as pesticides, minimum pricing, building regulations, granting construction permits, all of them are actually in the white paper as examples. So my advice to Murdo Fraser, and to Michael Gove is read your own white paper, because that's what you're going to be taking away.
And that's it for this week. As always, thanks for listening. I'm not going to be here next weekend, but I'm hoping a couple of the other Clacks wifeys might be able to get a podcast pulled together in my absence, so fingers crossed. And so we'll be back either next week or the week after that. Catch you later. Bye now.
In life.